I thought this was an incredible piece by the Marshall Project. They just put it out in the wake of Tyree Nichols' murder, talking about the money from the American Rescue Plan passed under Joe Biden in his first year of presidency. Remember when he discussed it at the State of the Union and basically said, yes, we have money and we want this money to go to neighborhoods. And specifically, he kind of referenced, we want it to go to law enforcement, and then said this.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
There we go. Bipartisan consensus. And they did fund them. In fact, a lot of the money that was supposed to go to COVID relief went to policing and prison systems. Thousands of state and local governments did with federal COVID-19 relief funds they received. That is indeed what they did. While the Treasury Department's lax reporting requirements make it difficult to track exactly how much was spent on law enforcement, corrections, and courts, a Marshall Project review of the latest data shows that billions of dollars flowed to the criminal justice system by the first quarter of 2022, from covering payroll to purchasing new equipment. So far, governments have allocated $101 billion of the total $300 billion specifically to that. There's something called revenue replacement, which is sort of a catch-all category in the American Rescue Plan. And a lot of that was spent on more fucking policing, you guys. This was after George Floyd. So let's look. This is from the Marshall Project. We've got Baldwin Park, California, $190K to replace obsolete police department tasers. Great. Where's the part that teaches them how to fucking use it correctly and which side of the body it's on? West Hartford, Connecticut, $220K for police body cameras. Cheatham County, Tennessee, there you go, in Tennessee, $7.9 million for a jail expansion project. People, this was supposed to help us in the wake of COVID. Nash County, North Carolina, $10 million for provision of government services, law enforcement. Coral Springs City, Florida, $43,000 for ballistic rifle plates. And in Salt Lake City, Utah, $6.6 million for police retention and recruitment. That's where our money went.
I mean, someone said this in chat, but I mean, what you think Cop City that they're building in Georgia isn't going to go to that? No, it's going to be for calming people down and de-escalating. That's what it's de-escalation city, really. It's what they're building. It's going to be really nice there. Don't worry about it.
I mean, it's fundamentally a misunderstanding of what the function of police is. Either deliberate or in some cases naive. I think some people are kind of maybe new to this and haven't heard the same rhetoric over and over again. But, you know, it's like anyone who studied this, who either wasn't fear mongering or on the till of the Manhattan Institute, will tell you that this is fundamentally an issue of under-resourcing and poverty, and that the way you address crime. Because again, why does the U.S. have the biggest incarceration state in the world? Not even close, right? 25%. Of the world's caged people with 5% of the population, but also at the same time have the highest murder rate of any country, and it's not even close. And even though it has dropped since the 90s, it's still higher than any other comparable country in the quote unquote West. So we have this contradiction at the heart of our system, where we are simultaneously the most caged and policed and jailed, but also still the most violent.
Yeah. Now
the throwaway line is, oh, we have a lot of guns, but of course all these things stem from the same problem, which is we have the biggest predictor of one of the biggest predictors of criminality, quote unquote, is the lack of social trust. And the biggest predictor of the lack of social trust is inequality. It's not even just relative poverty. It's actually it's not just poverty, absolute poverty. It's relative poverty. We have a lot of rich people with a lot of money and a lot of poor people with nothing, who are barely scraping to get by. And mitigating that, right, creating things like basic income, a right to housing, stipends. A lot of cities are just handing people money now, and guess what? Yeah. Studies show it works. It's going through a philanthropic means, so that's not good. But the empiricism is still very sound, right? And anyone who studies this who isn't based on doing racialized fear mongering or kind of getting the Democrats past the next election will tell you that you have to have a reorientation of our society if you're going to address this fundamental problem of what we call crime, what we call street crime, right? And that's just off the table, especially in the so-called post-COVID austerity. That's just not an option. And really the only way that these highly atomized polities, these cities and states that can't federally fund, they can't deficit spend, they can't really make housing, they can't really afford to pay for basic income. The only way they can really deal with quote unquote crime is by getting more federal money for police. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit apologetic, but That is just the only way they can manage the surplus population caused by this amount, this amount of inequality. And there is no real effort to have this kind of robust social safety net, because again, we saw during the pandemic, during certain times, poverty went down, and even during the early parts of 2021, crime was down relatively, depending on the crime and depending on the city. But we don't want to have this, nobody really realistically wants to talk about that. And the analogy I use in one of my pieces, which is kind of hacky, is you'll routinely see people say, oh, well, this poll shows that black voters want more police. This is a very popular thing with the Meta Iglesias and Noah Smiths of the world. They say, oh, well, if you actually poll black people, they want more police.
Right.
That varies based on poll. It also varies very much in how you sort of ask the question. It's just sort of, if you ask people if you support gay marriage versus homosexual marriage, there's like a 40-point difference. It really depends on how you kind of frame it. But one thing that is true is that, look, again, underserved communities are plagued with gun violence. This is a major issue. But this happened in the 90s too, when you had a lot of black leaders buy into Biden's first crime bill in 1994. And then later they went back and walked it back. But at the time, they're not offered anything else. So you have this issue of rampant crime. You have gun violence tearing communities apart that is nonstop. And the only thing they're given to solve that is police. And the hacky analogy I use is that someone's drowning and I've offered you barbed wire. And then you say, oh, a poll shows 60% of people prefer the barbed wire. And it's like, well, that's all you're offering them. They're drowning, right? The police are the only solution we ever offer anyone. And then we say, oh, look at this poll that shows how popular police are. And it's like, yeah, well, how come, if you poll these black voters who you suddenly care about, right? And you ask them their 10 most important things. One will be, yeah, more police because we have this crime problem. But they ask for reparations. They ask for good union jobs. They ask for healthcare. They ask for better schools. Those are not important. But suddenly, when it comes to more cops, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Democratic elite suddenly care about the preferences of black voters. The only time, by the way, they've ever cared is when it happens to align with the interest of real estate and wealthy white liberals. And so, there's this idea that, like, quote unquote abolitionist or defund are these kind of pie in the sky George Soros thing. And it's like, no, again, you can debate the messaging of it, but the fundamental, if you poll people and you ask them about, forget the stigma of the label. If you ask people, do you want to redirect resources away from police, both white and black and Latino, supports that. It is overwhelmingly popular. But that's just right now, especially again, post-COVID austerity, it's such it's like a perpetual motion machine or infinite energy. It's so abstract. No one even thinks about it. So we just say, okay, well, we have no choice. We got to go back to just relying on the police to manage crime, even though, again, it's much more efficient, much more humane, much more logical to address it at its root causes.
Yeah, and I think to what Dan was saying, taking the black vote for granted, not actually listening to black communities when they're asking for the job training, the healthcare, the not choking on pollution by living next to some refinery, all of those things. And we've had Alicia Garza on, who works with the Black Futures Project, and I think around elections, they always poll, do some grassroots polling of voters, and it's the top line is healthcare. The top line for black voters actually is the top line for all American voters. It's just more pronounced because it's disproportionately, impacts the black community. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.